Hello and welcome to Why Medics Matter, a podcast for doctors by doctors. We are your hosts. I'm Dr Anna Baverstock.
And I'm Dr Simon Fraser. And I'm delighted to invite a good friend, colleague, Dr Anna Baverstock, who's a paediatrician. But Anna, I'll let you, you're the second time back to the show, but do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone, and it's lovely to be back with you guys again. So I'm Anna, I'm a community paediatrician down in Somerset, and I also have a role within the trust as an associate medical director looking at leadership and wellbeing, and I guess sort of wellbeing in terms of how we look after ourselves during our working day. So wellbeing at work is a particular passion of mine, and I guess I also have a coaching and mediation background as well, which often comes into some of my kind of thought processes.
So Anna, today you're joining us on the podcast, and the aim of the podcast is to talk about the transition between being a doctor in training, resident doctor, to stepping up to that next level of maybe being a consultant, maybe being a SAS doctor, and having that individual responsibility, having more autonomy. And I remember, I'd like to say it was last year, but it wasn't when I was a consultant. So I became a consultant in January 2018, which is nearly 8 years ago. It feels like it was yesterday. And the clinical stuff was okay. I'd been doing it for such a long time. But what I didn't anticipate was everything else that came with being a new consultant. Whether it be leadership, management, looking after people, I guess. And you've got huge amounts of experience. And I think it would be good just to have some of your reflections, some tips. So, Anna, over to you. How can we do this well?
So I think the key is to prepare. And so I think if you are listening in the kind of brilliant position of being a few months out of potentially undergoing that transition, then this is perfect timing, because now is the time to start preparing. I think like any change, I think there's some really exciting things about it. And I think there's some things that are kind of, it's the sort of known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, isn't it? All of those different things that are going through. So I think to prepare. And I guess there's different scenarios, isn't there? So some of us did our final training job in the environment where we then became a consultant. Some of us had the opportunity to be a locum in the environment where we were. And for some colleagues, I'm aware that they are starting in a completely brand new hospital, potentially in a completely brand new area. So I guess with any of those situations, I think the important thing is to prepare, because even if you did your final resident doctor job in the place where you are going to be a consultant, there is still an absolute difference between the day that you walk into the hospital as a consultant or as a SAS grade doctor in a permanent role. So the bits that I think you can do to prepare in advance is to meet as many people as possible, even if it's virtually. So make sure you have a conversation with your clinical service lead, not just in interview. Are there some other key people that'd be really helpful to have a bit of a conversation with? Are there some other of your paediatric colleagues, so not necessarily paediatrics, that's me slipping into peds mode, your consultant colleagues that you can potentially have an informal conversation with? Even better, can you meet socially to start with? Okay, because actually what we really know about the transition to a consultant or a SAS grade job is that it feels really different. So you're not part of a training scheme, you're not part of a cohort of people all starting together and having a kind of team induction. Often you're the only one that's new starting. So there's something about, can you sort of meet some people? Can you have some conversations? Can you get to know people in advance? So I guess that would be my first thing. And then I guess for me, it's about thinking about the clinical role that you're going to be having, and also about the team that you're going to be working with. And I think both of those areas are really important. So I guess then moving into when you start, again, hopefully you've done your homework, and hopefully you're working in an organisation that actually really values the fact that you're starting new and has got some really good induction planned out. Okay, so in amongst all of the mandatory training that you're potentially going to need to do, is there something specific about your, induction for you? And so locally, we do a separate induction program for all new senior doctors alongside the trust induction, where we look at some of the things that we potentially think that all new senior doctors are going to kind of need in the first year or two. So I guess that's sort of a few things to start with. For me, it's about, and I think those first few years, it's really about getting to grips with the clinical role of being a senior doctor. And I think we underestimate what a difference it is from being a very senior trainee, often, or senior resident doctor. Sorry, I'm lapsing into old-fashioned language, where you sort of felt very confident and you had a really good support structure and your consultant was sort of very much the sort of backup in the background, to suddenly then stepping into that person who then is that kind of person in the background. And no matter how much training you've done, no matter how much locum consulting you've done, there's something about seeing your name at the end of the bed, or seeing your name on the clinic room, or seeing your name on the bottom of the clinic letter, that comes with quite a big sense of responsibility. And I would suggest taking time just to get used to that added level of responsibility is really important.
It's really tempting, isn't it, when you become a consultant, to take on lots of other roles as well, to sort of like prove yourself that you can do lots of things. And actually, it is the right thing just to take time to be in that role and feel it and live it and be it. And really, I guess, discover what type of consultant you're going to be. Because actually, you have all these preconceptions as to how you're going to be, but until you actually start to be that person, it's very different.
And absolutely. And I think as well, in particular, like often what happens during the last bits of your training is you sort of work out where you are in terms of, I don't know, how you're going to manage your outpatient clinics. And sometimes you're working alongside a consultant that works very differently to you, and you're getting a bit frustrated with it because actually you want to sort of do it that way and you're being encouraged to do it a different way. And I always say to resident doctors that are working alongside me, if I'm starting to annoy you with my advice, that's great, because actually that's a sign that you're ready to kind of take it on your own. And let's face it, for many things, there are different ways of doing it. And yet, when you then step into that kind of that big jump to actually, there's no one there routinely to ask at the end of the clinic or to go through the clinic. But I guess that's the bit that I would probably slightly challenge everyone. Develop those wise owl mentors. Hopefully you've gathered them up during training. I know that I carried a whole load of them in my pocket on my phone, the sort of phone of friends that I would often get to the end of clinic, having seen 2 or 3 young people where I really wasn't totally sure what I was going to do next step. And you can still ask. And I think that's the other really important thing, is that if you haven't already gathered a lot of people that are in your sort of mentoring and leadership pool, then again, prepare for your consultant job by sort of being very specific in terms of, I would really like to have you as one of my wise owls. And then obviously within your new working environment, you can gather up colleagues as you go in terms of who you're sharing an office with, who's you're potentially going to be working with, so I think that's the beautiful thing about, I've now been a consultant for 20 years. You gather up a whole load of different people. I just have more people to ask. That's brilliant. So there's something about that within the clinical role, particularly. To your point about the other things, and again, I think that's a trap we often fall into, aren't we? We're a brand new, shiny person. We want to be a people pleaser. We want to make sure we make a good impression. And let's face it, those of us who've been around for a little while sometimes see the opportunity of a new colleague coming into the department to offer the opportunity of something too that perhaps we're wanting to stop, get rid of. So I always suggest that actually, you don't have to say no, but you can say, I just want to spend the first 6 to 12 months getting my feet under the table in terms of my clinical role. Perhaps you could let me have that opportunity in a little bit of time, because actually, particularly if it's not yet in your job plan, just getting your head around managing a job plan is a new thing, isn't it? So the opportunities won't go away, but you can always hit pause on them rather than taking everything on to start with.
Can I come in there as well? Because it's I think we often give the narrative say no to everything. And I can sort of see the healthiest part of that. But if I'd have said no to everything in the first thing, I wouldn't be where I was. And I think it's about being smart and, choosing the right opportunities. I think it's harder now, though, because when I started, I had 2.5 SBAs. I had so much. You could do that and you could absorb it. How do we help a new consultant who has been maybe given a 10-peer job plan and is, before they know it, even with the current work, they're working well above that and they don't even realise that?
Yeah. So I think that comes down to actually making sure that as part, because of course, what I think is really fascinating about taking on a new consultant role is that all that you've known as a doctor in terms of educational supervision goes out the window. So the entire framework in terms of your support, that is all you have known since you were a foundation doctor, has then gone. Which is so one of the reasons that we locally give everyone a mentor when they first start. So a consultant or a SAS grade starting to the role has a mentor. Now it's a different relationship to the educational supervision, but actually it's someone that can kind of help as a guide. The real temptation with the job plan when you're a new consultant is everything. I think the thing that we sometimes underestimate is everything takes a little bit longer when you're a new consultant because you need to investigate things a little bit more. You're putting more thought into some of the things that we do automatically. You're perhaps using a bit more system 2 thinking because you're developing some of those routes in terms of those fast automatic decisions. Now, arguably, you sometimes make better decisions because of it, because everything is very cognitive and thoughtful. And that takes time and energy. And so what I suggest you do is have some mentors around you that are critical friends that perhaps you meet in 6 months' time or 9 months' time and sort of say, okay, so how are you doing in terms of carving out your week and how are you organising things? So I'm a big fan of the Eisenhower matrix. It's one of the very few things that I have always had on every single office wall. So if listeners aren't familiar with it, it's what's urgent versus not urgent and what's important versus not important. And I have what I call blue time in my diary, which is what's important to me but not urgent. And I know that that's sort of like my predictor of stress, is that I know that if I then start overwriting that blue time in my diary with meetings or with other things, then I know that I then haven't got that really important critical space for me. It's the work equivalent to opening the laundry cupboard at home and the whole lot tumbling out at me. So there's something for me about what are you, when you've got a 10PA job plan and you're feeling very, very busy, what is it you're actually busy with? How much of it how much of it is urgent and important and we need to get on with it? How can we carve out some of that blue thinking time? And can we also, really important lesson to learn as a new consultant, what do we delegate? And what do we delegate in a supervisory way? So, for example, we may delegate it to one of our registrars to do. And how do we properly delegate it rather than parallel do it anyway? So how do we properly learn to delegate and give them the time and the thinking space rather than often what we do, which is actually, we fall into the trap of thinking we have to do everything.
So we talked a little bit about job plans and carving out time within that space. Now, what's really important as well, I think from day one, and also as you progress through those first couple of years, is to really find what brings you joy at work. Because we can get bogged down in saying yes to things because that's what people think we'd be good at or that we'd like, but actually, what do we really enjoy doing? And start, even at those early stages, to think about, where do I see myself in 6 months' time, a year's time? And I think that's incredibly important because sometimes you might do something and go, do you know what? I really enjoy rotas and I didn't think I would. And it's about trying different things. But
did you say rotas and enjoying the same sentence?
I don't. I'm really bad with rotas. But it's about, there may be somebody out there who's rotas.
It's about trying stuff. I think a lot of people get imposter thoughts.
So we know that if you spend 20% of your working week, and this is in Tate Shanafelt's work from the States. If you spend 20% of your working week doing something that's deeply meaningful to you, then it is protective of burnout. And it's a little bit like you were saying, Simon. I'm certainly seeing quite a lot of colleagues now that I don't really like the term quiet quitting, but there's certainly some of my colleagues that are saying no to a lot of things, and they are reducing back down to their core activities, and it's not bringing them joy. And we tend to do that when we're under pressure, because we naively assume that if we start clearing our diary, then we have more time to do the urgent, important things. So I would argue this is back to Eisenhower. What's important to us? What do we want to spend some time in our week doing? And so again, I would really suggest that everyone within the first year or two of being a consultant or a SAS grade doctor sits down and thinks, okay, what are the areas that really bring me joy and meaning? What are the areas within my week that I really look forward to? What are the areas that I want to enhance and develop? And if that's teaching, and if that's supervising resident doctors, actually, how can you then think about potentially becoming an educational supervisor or a clinical supervisor? If that's actually you really enjoyed doing a little bit of research or quality improvement when you were a resident doctor, actually, how can you do that? You know, when you start in a new role, there will be lots of things that potentially you want to be able to change. I always say to medical students when they first arrive in the department, please tell us the things that you notice within the first 2 weeks that seem really ridiculous of why we're doing it that way. Because within 2 weeks, you'll become institutionalized and you won't then see the crazy way of doing things. Okay. It's a little bit like that as a consultant, whether you're working in a structure that's familiar or not. What are those things that you potentially want to change? So yeah, absolutely. It is not about saying no to everything. And it might be about saying, yes, but can I start it in 6 months' time? Or it might be about saying, actually, yes, this is something I really want to be able to do. How can I carve it into my job plan and make time to be able to do it? So yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that.
And just to pick on that last point, I think it's about trading.
Yes.
And I think what we see is people have very heavy jobs and they take on additional things. So they don't think they can trade and just have to squeeze it in. And I think it's sort of, okay, yeah, I will do that. But actually that's got to take a session, and maybe the expectation of how many acute clinics I'm seeing is, you know, I want to keep within a reasonable job plan, because I don't want to all of a sudden be working 13, 14. But I want to have those opportunities.
Yeah. And I think while you're talking of trading, I think there's also some things that I think we really need to talk about more, which is how do we as consultants and SAS grade doctors manage the things that aren't necessarily in our job plan but are the part of the job plan. So everyone always goes to emails. Well, all an email is communication. So an email is a communication between two people or between 20 people, depending on whether it's one of these joyous reply all emails. So an email doesn't mean that it's important or urgent. So the fact that it pings into our inbox when we're doing something else does not mean it demands your immediate attention. So when I first started, I sound very old, for such consultant, we very rarely used email and everything was paper. So I used to have this amazingly satisfying thing of coming into a very full, visibly full inbox. I'm a community paediatrician. My notes were enormous. And then at the end of the day, I would have this visibly very full outbox and my inbox would be empty. And I think we can all get so much smarter at how we manage our communication around both our clinical areas of that we need to, but also our kind of non-clinical and our leadership. And no matter how long you spend sitting at your inbox, all you're effectively doing is sending off a whole load of messages that are just going to come back. So again, being much smarter at how we reply, who we reply to, really thinking about our communication. And I would, go on, suggest doing that early.
Well, walking down the corridor.
Yes.
You know, writing to your colleague for an opinion on a particular specialty. Go and grab them. Pop in the office, kind of pick your brains, and that's why we learn. It's what you talked about. You're not being on your own, and how do we deal with uncertainty? So it's quite easy not easy, but it's easy to pass the buck. You see somebody have patients, you ask somebody else, you arrange for them to come back in 3 months, and you've gone, and somebody else picks it up. Whereas actually, when you're in the long-term responsibility for a group of people, and knowing how much to investigate, how not. How have you dealt with that in your career?
So I've probably changed. So there's a beautiful article written by John Lorna, who's a GP, who talks about the tapestries that we weave. And he talks a lot about when you especially when you're dealing with someone with complexity or with a chronic illness, do we sort of dig a hole and investigate everything, or do we actually just sort of think about it in terms of more of a sort of patchwork in terms of how we weave those stories? So I would suggest being kind to ourselves, that will change. And the example I always used to use is the LP rate when you're a paediatric registrar. So when you're first a very junior doctor, every single slightly septic looking child, you have a very, very low threshold to do an LP because you're always really worried. And then perhaps you get a little bit more confidence as an SHO going into a sort of a training registrar role. And perhaps you then kind of use a bit more clinical acumen. And then when you step up into perhaps an ST4 or 5, again, your LP rate probably goes up because, again, you're then the decision maker. And then perhaps you get a bit more confident, and then perhaps you see a child who actually is more ill than perhaps you initially thought they were. And so you kind of, so there's this oscillation that will also happen as a consultant. So you will have a natural tendency in terms of how much of an investigation do you need to know? How much risk are you happy to hold as a doctor, and how risk averse are you? And there's no judgment there, but it's really important that you have insight into where you are. And then you also almost do a kind of self-sense check every now and then, because I think when something happens, when you get a complaint, when you perhaps don't see something the first time around, and then actually you then, beat yourself up because you feel like you've missed something, you're always going to change sort of where you are on your risk scale. But I think no matter what role you're in as a consultant, you're always going to need to manage some uncertainty, because by default, that's what we do. We don't necessarily have the answer for absolutely everything clinical that we come across. And what we're needing to do is to use sort of safety netting and using that decision making. That's where our peers come in. And I think what I tend to do is I tend to be pretty clear and conscious. So again, it's going into the system too. I'm making a conscious decision that this is what I think is happening at the moment. But if these things were to change, then my decision making changes. Now, sometimes you get into a situation where you're not necessarily enmeshed from a kind of psychological point of view, but you're too involved in the situation. You almost need to get someone in, not necessarily as a second opinion, but to sort of pull you out so that you can take a sort of slightly broader view. And I think that's how we should use our colleagues a little bit more, because we all get into those situations where we can't necessarily see what's needed, or we're aware we're not quite delivering what's needed for the family. And that's where having a conversation with someone, I think, is really helpful.
I was just going to echo what you said, but I've got keen interest in uncertainty in clinical decision making. And I think it's really important to be open with the patient and say, I actually don't know what's going on. And there's been a lot of work done by Pratt Koskeri over in Canada, Gurpreet Dhaliwal over in America, talking about these issues that if you make things up to patients or you're not open and honest with them, that they lose that respect. Whereas if you say, do you know, because I'm an acute physician, I take risks every day. And you're not really trained how to do that, but I'll often say, I don't know what's going on. I do know that it's not this, but I don't know what it is. And you often get a really good response from the patient. Thank you so much for being honest with me. And I'll say, well, this is what we're going to do to try and help us. And sometimes we never know what it is. It's just one of those things. There was also something else that you talked about with under and over investigation. And I agree, we certainly do change, don't we, as we go through our career. And again, it's about involving the patient and the family, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that shared decision making.
Yeah. And do you know what? You've just sort of hit something else. I think these are the conversations that are really helpful to have in your appraisal as well. So I guess the other thing I was going to say at that very beginning, something about being able to take a step back from your clinical practice and reflect on it is really important. I'm a massive fan of reflective practice. And I think if you really think about how you reflect about things and then add in feedback as and when you can get it, then your career as a doctor is then, you're then really enabling that kind of yourself to continue to learn and grow, and also learn a bit more about yourself. And I don't think we talk nearly enough about that. So the other thing I would massively recommend, and I wish I'd known and thought about it sooner, is to think about how you reflect on your practice. Now, that can be personally in writing, or, with old-fashioned pen and a book. It can be with colleagues, but having something where you are reflecting on your practice and then thinking about how you add feedback into it, I think is really important. And in an ideal world, the appraisal would then be almost like your sort of annual chance to be able to share some of that reflection, because you've obviously uploaded it in your portfolio. But that's where getting a mentor and a coach is really important as well, to sort of help and aid you with that reflection.
I've always argued that why do we wait to get to somebody's been in post for the first appraisal? And in some ways, your first appraisal would be ideal about 3 months, when you've just orientated yourself and say, right, what's my PDP for the first year? But we sort of...
Yeah, and also midway point. So again, back to what we're used to is having an educational supervisor review sort of every 3 months, isn't it? And then we suddenly are scrabbling around, and I'm chuckling because I'm coming up to my appraisal, so I am literally scrabbling around. But how many of us remember what's in our PDP from one year to the next if we've only had a year review? So for me, there's something about, can we use that in coaching time or in mentoring time, or can we just have an informal conversation with our appraiser when we're new, saying, look, I've got my appraisal with you booked for, I don't know, next May. It would be really helpful for me if we could just have a bit of a conversation, because otherwise, to your point, Simon, the year goes round and suddenly everything's got really busy and we haven't actually had a chance to kind of, step off the hamster wheel and have a think about where we're going, let alone what we're doing.
Can I share a concern? I don't know if it's something I've noticed in my area of practice, which was with the move to bigger teams. I started with 6 pediatricians, finished with 16, 17, and a lot of people working virtually. It just felt, when I started, there were 5 of us who were in a corridor, and you could knock on any door and there was somebody there, and you'd be reading the referral letters and going, I'm not sure what to do with this. And I was taking to my colleague Sean, what do you think? It was just like next door. What do we need? Is that gone? Have we still got pockets of it? How do we recreate that team for consultants?
Yeah. So, oh my goodness me. So, and let's face it, we know that if you've got 6 to 8 of you, like the team that can share a pizza is a team that doesn't need to have a communication strategy, because you kind of can all sort of, particularly if you're all in a shared location. So very similar. I think we've now got 34 paediatricians and most of us work part-time. So actually, even just getting together for a wider paediatric senior doctor meeting is incredibly challenging. So I think that we do have to carve out time when we see each other face to face alongside virtual meeting. So I think there is something about the different communication that happens when you are face to face that is really hard to mirror when we're purely virtual, particularly when we're getting to know each other. So there's some quite interesting research that if a team knows each other, it can maintain relationships virtually because if you've had the historical knowledge of having known each other face to face, but every now and then you almost need that face to face recharge. And I think it's because humans are designed to sit around a campfire together and chat. So I know much more about the colleagues who I do make time to see face to face in terms of what's happening at home, what's happening with their children, what's happening in their lives. And also you ask the so-called silly question much more face to face. So we have recently, so there are now about 8 of us in our community child health department, and we have now recently suggested that we go back to our team huddle once a month, being face to face as much as possible. And in fact, we start a meeting half an hour later and really encourage everyone to arrive half an hour earlier and have lunch together. And the meeting starts on time, is much more productive, is much more joyous. No one is distracted pretending they're in the meeting, but they're actually rereading emails or trying to kind of sign their clinic letters. They are all actually just in the meeting. So for me, it's not just being virtual. Normally, when we're on a virtual meeting, we get distracted by other things. So not only are we virtual, but we're also only paying 50% of attention, because the temptation to look at the email or sign the letters or while I'm here is just too strong. And you wouldn't do that. Well, very few of us would have the confidence to sit in a face-to-face meeting with a laptop and start signing off clinic letters. I'm sure some probably do. But yeah, so I think that
used to happen.
Yeah.
That used to happen in some of our exec meetings, which was rather interesting. Yeah. Okay. We're coming towards the end. I normally ask you what advice you'd give yourself as a new doctor, but I want to frame the question again. What advice would you give yourself as a day one consultant or SAS doctor?
So I
if you one bit of magic advice.
Yeah. So the bit that I really, really wish I'd done is started an intentional reflective practice from day one. And I think there's something about that, thinking about how I was making clinical decisions, thinking about how I wanted to be as a consultant. And I think an intentional reflective practice, and I would have probably found a coach a little bit earlier, because I think those two things would have been really, really helpful to me.
I just want to add mine in there as well.
Yeah, please, Amie.
I remember when I was leaving, I've been a locum consultant for a few months, and I was moving to a place that I'd worked as a trainee and been to medical school. So I knew it very well. And I said to my mentor, what one piece of advice would you give me? And she said, be authentic, be you. And I've taken that with me, because I remember then going to my job as a consultant and thinking I had to act like a consultant. I was like, how do consultants act? Do I need to wear a suit? Do I need to wear, specific shoes? And do I need to talk in a consultant way? And I tried it, and I was like, no, this is not me. So now I am me. And I think that's really important, that we are authentic at work, that we don't lose our behaviors, our personality. So being authentic is really important, because we are role models. We become a consultant, we're role models for so many people.
And there's
Totally
more than one way of being it, isn't it? So full disclosure.
Absolutely.
I bought myself a briefcase when I started my consulting job.
Did you?
Which I used for about a week until I discovered it was really heavy. It was a beautiful leather one, really heavy, really impractical. And it's literally sat in the corner of the office now, gathering dust.
I love it.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. I'm going to try and sort of summarize what I've taken away from this, Anna, if that's okay. And thank you for your wisdom and sharing that. Number one, I thought I took away was just prepare. Meet as many people as you can, make the effort. I remember starting, I was given a list of people I had to go and have coffee with. Like the pediatric radiologists and different people. You think, oh God, why this is really awkward. But actually go and meet as many people, build relations. Remember, you're a new person to the team. Any opportunities to socially connect is really important. And how we bring some of our meetings back face to face, particularly for new people. As we said, if it's new relationships, it's really hard to start them online. And take time to, as you say, your blue box. Work out what's really important. Find somebody who can mentor and give you advice. And don't be afraid to ask, and recognize that we'll oscillate. So huge amount of wisdom there. It is one of the best things you can ever do. I think it's a big step. But if we don't grow and take big steps, life gets boring. Anna, thank you. Thank you very much. Amie, any final words?
Echo what you said. And I think, again, I'd echo prepare. Prepare, be authentic, and remember that we're in this for the long run. So and actually as a consultant, we will step up to different roles within a consultant level as well. So, and it's being prepared for those. Thank you so much, Anna, for a fantastic episode. And a massive thank you to all of our listeners out there. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.